Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for all dedicating an hour of your valuable time. Um, this is a kind of DRACHMA part two. So we're getting back into our regular um, monthly meetings, and essentially the aim of our network is to spread good practice, to share success, show a bit of data, show and highlight some of the issues, to really promote the use of drones for improving access to healthcare, and also thinking about some of the challenges as well. And the real aim is to bring in people from academia, operators, regulators, those actually building the drones and experimenting and developing those, but also some of the customers, some of the people in the NHS and the emergency services who would benefit from all the lovely user cases that over the next few months people are going to talk about. So I've got lots of people coming in. A little bit of housekeeping. I'm recording this particular meeting. So in terms of the speakers have given given their permission for me to do that. But in terms of conversations that may occur, don't reveal anything that you don't want to be exposed to the general public, because sometimes people will go, "Oh, I've done an experiment X," and it gets spread, kind of thing. Um, so our first speaker is Professor Tom Cherrett, who's leading the way in drop testing and making sure that our medicines arrive safely and within a good distribution practice. So, Tom, do you want to grab the microphone?
Thanks
Oh,
very
and the
much,
last bit of
Paul.
housekeeping is, can we have all microphones off apart from the speaker? And I'll give you an opportunity to ask questions at the end. Okay, then, Tom.
Great, thanks very much, Paul. I wouldn't say leading the way. I can certainly demonstrate failures, which I'm going to do in the next kind of 15, 20 minutes. But yeah, it's great and a great to be able to speak to you, and thanks very much for the invite, Paul. So I'm basically going to talk about the design of some medical carriers that can withstand a fall from 400 feet, which is work we've been trying to do as part of the EPSRC e-drone project and also the Solent Transport Future Transport Zones drones project. And this is all around the vehicle certification agency's crash-proof container regulations. So a little bit about the challenge. So this is what we've really been looking at, working with the NHS, particularly St Mary's Hospital on the Isle of Wight. Can standard insulated medical carriers be used for multimodal logistics across the NHS? It'd be great if the MHRA approved packaging that's been used across all different trusts might be able to go onto a van, onto a lorry, a cargo bike, and a drone. So we haven't got bespoke packaging specifically for drones. And they carry a variety of different things: patient pathology samples, bloods, medicines. So yeah, that's the main area we've been looking at and how we might integrate these. But the current containers that are used, a lot of them, the VersaPack, which I'll come on to, is quite ubiquitous within the system. Can it easily be converted into a crash-proof container? What will need to happen to it to make that even possible? So that's kind of what we've been looking at. So just a little bit of background. To carry classified dangerous goods by drone, you need to really comply with two separate bits of regulation. There's the International Civil Aviation Organization's technical instructions, and they apply to all dangerous goods that's transported by air. It's not just drones, that's normal crewed aircraft. And they specify how each dangerous goods must be packaged and handled. And then there is the Vehicle Certification Agency's Crash Protected Container regs, the CPC regs. And they apply only to DG transported by drone. They came out in 2022. So basically, you've got to let go of your container from 400 feet and it will hopefully survive when it hits the ground and there should be no leakage. So this is what we've been working with. VersaPack, a well-known company. There's many different companies that make insulated containers for medical purposes. VersaPack, and they're called VersaPacks. So we've been working with the middle one here, the medium, which is the most commonly used. You can see the dimensions there: 460 by 305 by 255 millimeters. Very useful if you've got kids like I have at university when they're going off and you're getting rid of them for the start of term, and you can pack all their frozen meals in there. They're very, very good for camping. And they've got a very long life. Some of the VersaPacks, some of them have been around in some trusts for over 20 years, individual bags. They do have a very good survival rate. There's around about 25,000 of these in circulation, and they're used by roughly about 80% of NHS trusts in the UK. They can carry around about 10 kilograms. Unloaded weight is just over 2 kilograms. And typically, when we've been doing our research with aseptic medicines, they might have around 5 kilograms of stuff in all told with cool bags, just to give you some idea of weight. And this on the right-hand side here is the Mugen V50, which was one of the aircraft that we used with Aviation to try and fly these to the Isle of Wight. So it gives you kind of an idea of scale. That was the largest drone that would actually take one of those when we were doing that work. So in terms of what is transported by VersaPaks and in relation to dangerous goods, well, there's blood and organs for transplant. They're not typically classed as dangerous goods. Medicines, those are often not classed as DG, but some are. And then we have patient pathology specimens, and that is obviously, they are dangerous goods under Division 6.2 UN 3373. So at the moment, well, not actually at the moment, because we're past this part, as I'll come on to, but the VersaPak, as it is now, complied with dangerous goods regulations for movement by road, but it wasn't by air. And that's something I'm going to come on to. So the CPC compliance, the crash-proof container, so these regs came out in 2022. Viking Packaging have come up with the first actual certified crash-proof container. And the interesting thing is what the market for this is anyway. So basically what you have to do, and I'll come on to the test in a moment, is you have to try and prevent leakage when it's been dropped from 400 feet onto hard standing. At the moment, UN 3373 classified goods are DG exempt at the minute. But that could be withdrawn at any time in the future, but that is the current situation. Other dangerous goods are not exempt, so there's many medicines in there. We've done a lot of work separately looking at the vibration profile of drones and using aseptic medicine. So paclitaxel is one that we've been using, which is DG classified. But with the beauty of AI, we decided to do a little investigation to work out, so what might the market be for a crash-proof container? It's a really interesting question. So we managed to scrape over 40,000 safety data sheets from various manufacturers, pharmaceutical manufacturers, you can see at the bottom there, and around about 10% had a DG classification. So it gives you a little idea of the kind of proportion of goods that might need to be moved in such a kind of container. So this is the real ideal solution. Could both regulations be satisfied by a single carrier? Could we adapt a VersaPak in some way such that it can be UN 3373 compliant, obviously, for the TI part, but also pass the crash-proof test in terms of the solids test and the liquids test, which I'll come on to. So the good news is we actually passed something, which has not been too common in the last 5 years, but we managed to obviously get the VersaPak TI compliance. So this is this basic rigidity test. So this was done by Smithers, a well-known testing laboratory. So essentially the VersaPak, the walls of it, the internal walls had to be stiffened. They were classically 1.2 mil thick. They are now 1.7 millimeter. And the test is basically, part of it is a stacking test, 3 meters of fully laden equivalent boxes on top of one at the bottom for 24 hours, and there must be no leakage or instability. And then it's got to be dropped from 1.2 meters of various orientations, and there must be no leakage from a standard cargo set. And it's successfully passed that. So the VersaPak can now move UN 3373 by air as well as road, which is good news. But the real meat of it is looking at the crash-proof container part. Dropping it from 400 feet is a completely different ballgame. So over the last kind of 4 years, we've been looking at different types of design. You can see the inside of the VersaPak there and the thick walls, the insulated walls. So we've looked at various types of ways of wrapping product, of using foam inserts for protection, and various types of leak-proof inner liner, which have been quite successful, actually. So the simplest way for the NHS, if you're in a busy laboratory, you take your product, and think of it rather when you go to get fish and chips. You got your fish and chips as the wrapping stage, first stage, and then an outer wrapper, and it's put in a bag. The outer bag here, the outer leak-proof liner, is key to keeping fluid in, and I'll describe what that means a little bit later on. So, but simplistic ways in which you can actually prevent fluid from leaking out once it's been dropped. But those were free fitting. So you've got your product and you're just putting it inside the container and then you're zipping it up. More latterly, we've been looking at integrated liners because this is part of the regs now. So in other words, if you use an inner liner, it has to be fitted within the bag so it's secured and sealed to the bottom. So we've been looking at these kind of roll top waterproof liners. So you put your product in the inside one, you roll that up, and then you roll the outer one around it. And that'll become clear in a moment. And then you roll it all down and put it in the bag. So how do you actually undertake drop tests? This is the really interesting part. So the task, in terms of the test itself, you have to either put your solids, so this is 2.5 kilograms of building sand for the solids test in the bottom of the Versa pack, or you put your liquid in, as you can see on the right here, you pour it in, you seal the bag up, then you drop it from 400 feet or terminal velocity, and I'll come back to that, onto hard standing, so tarmac or concrete. And after you've dropped it, there must be no major structural disruption or visible hole or gap post-drop. And if it's fluid, you have to put the bag in its most compromised position once it's hit the ground and leave it there for 8 hours, and there must be no leakage. So typically, we put it on its upside down on its lid. So that's the kind of challenge. You need a lot of equipment to do this. You've got to take photographs of all the faces of the bag before you drop it and then after you drop it, and video. So it's an interesting process. So how high is 400 feet? So I was on holiday on the 31st of May, 2023, and in Hamburg with my father-in-law and family, just visiting his old haunts. And I went past St. Michael's Church, and it said Bell Tower open for viewing, 406 feet. So I thought, right, 404 feet. So we frog marched the family in there, and just to see what it was actually like. I got to about 395 feet, 390 feet, but it's high up. It's really high up. You could use cranes. Cranes basically don't get this high, construction cranes. Another thing is, this is quite interesting, the National Lift Tower in Northampton. This is actually 418 feet, but in terms of dropping wise, we made contact, but 195 feet was all we could do. And you can see some of the inner chambers inside the structure here. They're quite narrow in terms of being able to drop stuff cleanly down it. But it's an interesting idea. Helicopters are another thing that's most commonly used. It's pretty quick to get permission sometimes here, but it's expensive. You know, hiring one of these for a day, some of the quotes we've had about 8,500, and then having a drop site that will license to allow you to do it. So you're not looking at much change, including VAT, from about £16,000 for a day if you're going to use a helicopter option. So in terms of how we did this, would the bags, is this a goer at all with some of these bags? So I wanted to try and drop some in quickly. So I was in this tower block for 10 years, and then it was closed in 2005, and we've just knocked it down. Now, this is the Faraday Tower. It was built, designed by Basil Spence, opened in 1963, and it featured on a postage stamp of fantastic British architecture in 1971 as part of the British Architecture series. But it had an empty lift shaft, 160 feet tall. So what we decided to do was get some bags, try business as usual. You can see an IV bag here, 250 mil, just with red saline in. So just drop a series of things, and most of them survived actually quite well. Even the foam one did. We dropped a bag a second time, and that did rupture. But just to give you a little idea of what this actually looks like. So 26th of June was when we tried this. A bit of video coming up. Hopefully this will work. It's quite tricky to do this. So we had basically bits of wood, as you can see here, to lever the handles off. But in any lift shaft, you've obviously got the openings of the floors below. Just let this drop and you'll see it. So actually getting it down and without hitting the sides. So the first few drops were a total disaster. We had to miss the dead pigeons at the bottom, and we had a ledge as well, which is hard to miss. But also, because of the way the air moves, the bag actually moves around as it goes past the empty doorways. So it is quite tricky to get something to fall cleanly down a shaft even of this size. And the major thing here was the bag was pretty good. The zip was the key thing. And obviously hitting a ledge doesn't really help. The foam insert is next. But most of these configurations worked. This was a clean drop. So we managed to miss all the sides with this one. So it did get up to full speed. It takes about 3 seconds to get to the bottom. But in every case, the zip broke. And that was the biggest failing on this. So we knew we would have to do zip strengthening or use Velcro sealants. We then moved to Llanbedr. So this is the Snowdonia Aerospace Centre. We've been there several times with various other projects. We work with Motion Robotics with their Titan drone. So the idea here was to try the full thing. We did it from 320 feet because we could prove that terminal velocity had been reached by that point, and we thought it was generally safer than 400. And the bag weighed about 4.5 kilograms, so we were using saline as well. You can see all the straps that keeps the thing on. And this is kind of what it looked like. So the major lessons learned here is how difficult it actually is to hit even a runway from this height. So some of these tests with a 14-kilometer crosswind with a 4.5 kilogram bag, the bag will be drifting maybe 16 meters into the runway. You'll see it on this drop here when the bag goes. If you look down, you'll see the white line and you'll see the bag suddenly start to move from right to left and about now. So it is pretty hard to hit things, and we miss sometimes and hit the grass when the wind dropped. But all in all, it was quite successful. The bags proved pretty robust. We did have various bits of leakage, but as a structure, it managed to hold quite well together. Although we had the straps on this, and that will be an integral part of the test, so it would be unique to this kind of drone, which you don't really want. The foam inserts were an utter disaster. Every single one broke. We had red dye everywhere, and it's very like with bubble wrap. You know, when you're popping it, we reckoned we had accelerometers in the bags. We had a shock sensor as well, about 380 G when it hits the ground. So there's no way the IV bag's ever going to survive. But the inner liners were very good. So in other words, every single time the IV bag would rupture, and you can't really prevent that. But we managed to retain the fluid using a loose fitted outer liner. So these bags are all left upside down for 8 hours. And in theory, they would have passed. The VCA didn't pass this because at the time, the VersaPack was not deemed rigid enough under the TI regs. And that's something we've addressed more recently. So just last bit. So in other words, first lessons learned, leak-proof liner is probably the way to go. The cool block is a nightmare. So when you're obviously moving aseptic medicines, they've got to be kept cool. And the usual way of doing that is to have a cool block. That needs to be housed separately or outside the inner liner. Otherwise, it's just a missile inside the bag. And using double-toothed zips is very important. So the zips, the kind of things you get on dry suits, and that's what we've been using more latterly. This is very recently, so this is at Ringwood in the summer. This is the Kinetic site at Herne. So again, with Kinetic, this is a tank turning area. It's ideal. It's good price as well. It's about £1,500 a day to use this facility. So here we've been using different types of inner chamber. We've done the solids test, and again used a new type of zip, which has been very successful. So we've actually got buckles on these bags as well. You can see bits flapping around, but we actually haven't secured them. The zip alone, we've dropped about 16 bags here, and the zips have never blown at all. So as a unit, we think it's pretty good. It's just trying to prevent fluid from leaking out of this now, and that's the last part of the work, really. So we've done the solids test and sent that for potential pass to the VCA. Interesting issues are the zip housing. You can see in the red circle there. That's potentially where, when we did the solids test, with sands. So obviously sealing that up is really important. But we've been looking at different types of commercial water container, actually. We had 8 samples, 4 actually passed from 400 feet, so they didn't leak. But the challenge now is to make that into a chamber out of that material. So we're working on that with various manufacturers. And the other key part, as I mentioned, is keeping the cool block separate. So in other words, VersaPacks have pouches like this already fitted in. That will have to be redesigned so that cool blocks can be kept separately. And this goes to show you, this is the variety of cool blocks we've experienced with the NHS working with St Mary's. There's a whole variety of different shapes and sizes used, so those need to be considered when designing this. And the final bit, this is quite exciting. So this is a new type of inner. So this is a product by Cortechnic, which is a patented vacuum rigidizing structure. So it's very malleable. You know, it's like a bit like a water bottle, really, I suppose. When it's flatted like this, pour the water in, close the leak-proof zip, and then pump air into it through the valve, and it solidifies around the product. So it's used very much for moving very sensitive electronic equipment. We're trying it for the first time, putting fluids in and seeing how that, as an inner chamber fitted in the bag, will actually survive. So that's another interesting kind of thing we're going to hopefully be testing in a few weeks' time. Little things to finish with. Obviously, the regulations are quite interesting and quite new relatively. And obviously, the test is about dropping onto hard standing. We've dropped some bags onto grass, and fairly, I wouldn't say moist grass, but the impact is very, very different. And given that, you know, a lot of drone routes will have to hopefully go via, you know, over non-populated areas. So you might be flying over more grass-related areas, etc. That image on the left is the impact of the bag hitting the ground. And my door key is in there, which is 4 centimeters deep. So the way the bag reacts and the way the shock travels through the bag, we've found on grass, leads to much more disruption. So greater tears in the bag, gaps being made, etc. So I think it's something later on to revisit these regs to say, well, hang about a minute. It's one thing for hard standing, but the shock experience and the potential damage from landing on other substances needs looking at. The other interesting thing is, why don't you try and slow the bag down? Well, the test is that you can't put parachutes on, but we had a group design project, and that's the great thing about university, where we were thinking about the sycamore seed. And so we put wings on. So imagine sides that are fixed on permanently but can pop out like this. So the yaw with the bag, and this was very interesting. It slowed the bag down by about 20%. And that makes a huge difference to the amount of damage that's experienced. So, I mean, but you think of the longevity of a Versapack, if they've been kicking around NHS institutions for 20 years, how long would even restrained ears that have been fitted on one corner but sealed down with a Velcro tab, how long would they really last? But it's an interesting concept as to whether you can get the bag to yaw on the way down and slow it down. Just generally to finish with, there's so many different types of carrier. This is the Indexa bag, which is really interesting. So Truro Trust and also Norwich, I think, are using this. So this is where all of your diagnostic samples get scanned at the surgery. They go into the bag and there's a RF reader in here. So they get read in to a specific tube. They can take about over 200 samples, one bag. You can see it next to the Versapack there. So it's a big unit. When it goes to the hospital, the massive advantage of this is you just push it through an RF scanner and it reads all of the tubes instantaneously. And even better, you don't obviously have to scan them in for the pathology lab, but it will tell you which are the urgent cancer samples to analyze first. So this is being adopted, by several institutions. If we had to drop this, that would be quite entertaining. But it's, I think the message I'm trying to get across is it's trying to utilize or work with the existing approved packaging is really important if NHS are investing in systems like this. If people want further information, we've literally just got this published. I think it was yesterday it came out. So this is just a write-up of kind of what we've been talking about, the trials and tribulations of doing this, what we've learnt, what went wrong, what worked, what didn't. So if anyone's interested, please scan the code and you can have a look at this paper, The Challenges for the Drone Logistics Sector in Complying with Dangerous Goods Regs, a case study in the UK health setting. So I hope that's been interesting. Welcome any questions at all. Thank you very much indeed.
Fab, Tom, that was absolutely tremendous. So,
and hopefully I'm to time.
Oh, absolutely. So we've got about 8 minutes for questions. So throw your hand up and we'll come
sharing.
to you. Getting some applause there. So I've got a question from Eric in the chat. So any plan to consider cargo box for radiopharmaceuticals, DG class 7?
That's a really important one. I think Skyfarer, there's somebody else who's working on that at the moment. I think part of the project in Coventry is looking at that. Yeah. We haven't thought about that one. I think they're going for the kind of, the full ingot kind of system in terms of encasing it. But no, we haven't entertained that. We've been just seeing whether we could do aseptic medicines, really. That's been the thing we've been focusing on most. But yeah, it's a really interesting area also to look at.
Cool. Any other questions? Oh, I've got a hand up there from, I can see, S. Crack on.
Hi, Tim Morrell from National Fire Chiefs Council. That was really informative. Yeah, you're obviously moving dangerous goods is always interesting anyway. We have slightly opposite. We are moving water and dropping water, which isn't, we think, considered a dangerous good, and we actually want it to impact and explode everywhere when it lands. So the opposite way around. But the question really is around the oddity of the regulations that you must have gone through to be dropping from the drone, and whether or not that was kind of catch-22 when you started going through that process.
Yeah. So do you mean how do you mean? Do you mean in terms of
being given permission to drop anything from the drone is a nightmare at the moment.
Well, that took 11 months. I didn't say that, but it took us 11 months to get permission to release something. And actually, the permission's now run out for Paul Motion Robotics, so they've got to reapply for it.
Brilliant.
And that's quite, So it's a big hurdle, really. I mean, they're not used to people requesting they want to drop something and let go of it. But it's unique. And I think now, actually, because of SORA, it kind of falls between the cracks in terms of permission. So it's with the CAA at the moment, and we're just hoping. I mean, I can let you have the details of the guys from Motion Robotics who are dealing with it, but people don't really request that type of thing, and it's a hard one to get round, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we're going down the state aircraft designation now anyway, because it's just getting a bit a bit outward now. Some of the things being thrown at us are just
it is. Wind racers have got permission as well. Wind racers are the other people I know.
Yeah,
of
we
just
did
got
work
permission.
quite a lot with wind racers at Lambeda of all places as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's where we did the first drop. So it's the kind of, but yeah, they have also now got permission to drop as well. I think it's just those, they're the only ones at the minute.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no problem.
Tom, Daniel's got a couple of cracking questions there. Daniel, do you want to grab the mic and put those questions to Tom?
Sure, I'll grab the virtual mic. And by the way, I have to say, excellent presentation. Really surprised the level of detail. So
thank you.
Congratulations. Yeah, and because of my former past, I used to work for Vacutech. So let's say I should know a little bit about some of the things that you were talking. And I was thinking about the VIP insulation material. So basically, it's a much thinner material. And when considering using these sort of boxes into the cargo bay of a drone, which is very limited, both in terms of size, so dimensions, but also in terms of weight. I think that's something maybe that one thing it allows is by doing it thinner insulation panels, you can, let's say, work on the protection shelter. So you make it more robust. So it's a trade-off, right? It's either you insulate with thicker walls, but different material, or then you go with thinner walls, but then harder material. The shell is more robust.
Very good point.
Yeah, that's one. And the other one has to do with the cool packs. Also, in my last days with Vacutech, I learned they were experiencing, and not just them, but many other manufacturers, they were experiencing with the gel formulas, even for the above 0 Celsius temperature ranges, which basically avoided leakage in terms of, sometimes the case will crack for whatever reason.
Of the cool blocks, yeah.
Exactly. So just
it's kind of
some hints.
They're very good points, actually. I mean, a lot of it is guided by the kind of way the NHS works, and the speed. It's just a standard routine to shove a cool block in with bubble wrap on it, so it doesn't come into contact directly with the product. But the one idea was that, the actual sides, the cool blocks are integrated into the side of the actual VersaPack, and then they could be chilled. But I take your point. I think some of the gel things are quite interesting.
Thank you.
I was just going to weigh in, Tom.
Yeah, go on, Kath, go for it. Yeah.
I was going to say, so because when I did some work on the Blood Forward programme with the MOD, they were using the vacuum insulated panels with integrated phase change panels and things like that. And I think it's just a bit of a shift in how you're designing it because of the rigidity. You're kind of going more down the absolutely bomb-proof route. They're putting these inside pellet cases. And, you're going to create a crater in the earth if you hit the ground with that. Whereas we're sort of, much more on this sort of softer side. We're leaning into that deformation when it hits the ground, stiffening it enough just so it passes PI 650, and then, but still trying to keep as much sort of padding as possible. And on the phase change material, exactly that. Most of the stuff that we use is phase change stuff. I think Matt's going to weigh in as well, sorry.
I was just going to say that it was, part of it is staying as close to the standard, an important part of it is staying as close to the standard VersaPack as you can. There are other design options that you could consider, but part of it was we want this to be as close to a standard VersaPack, which the whole of the NHS already uses and is already familiar with, as possible, which precluded going anywhere too far with different wacky designs and things.
Fantastic. Yeah, you're right. Matt, I've got to be really rude because there's a couple of fantastic questions and we've just got a minute to go. So Alex, you nicked my question. Do you want to reveal yourself and ask your question about RF?
Sure. Good afternoon to everyone. From Malta. We are just experienced with NFID chips similar for parcel tracking, supply chain, and automation. But when we developed something like this with the manufacturer, we came immediately to possible impacts on the gyro and other navigational systems. So it looks very fancy, and for automation, even for processing with the hospital, But we really would be interested if there's some more experience of possible interferences, electromagnetic interferences on the onboard systems.
Yeah, hi Alex, good to see you. Yeah, I mean that's the Indexa bag. We haven't even thought about flying that at all. We haven't done anything with RFID from that sense. But it's just I just slung that in there as, you know, if those things do come around, that's a classic example of how that could be very difficult. And
yes.
I don't think people have really thought at all about the implications on the drone system from using that type of thing. So that's something that I think, you know, it's working great in its the way it is for the ground logistics, but for air, I think it's a total different ballgame. So it's a very valid point and hasn't been considered, I think.
Yes. The same with the requirement from many hospitals for tracking and tracing. I mean, there are some products out there, AirTags and co, similar technique and technology, and same possible interference chances that it might have impact on it.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for that. It's a good point.
Thanks, Alex. Very briefly, there's several questions that have come in, which I'm going to have to put to perhaps email and follow up. But
yeah, that's okay. We can do that. Yeah.
But there's a really nice point I just want to capture from Olivier. Do you want to open up just very briefly?
Thank you, Paul. So very briefly, I don't know how many of you have watched the work from Wings for Aid and their self-landing delivery box solution. I just would like to have your opinion as an expert, a subject matter expert in that area about this solution.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that is a very interesting solution. It's and it would be very nice to try that to see what the forces are when it actually hits the ground for medical products. But I think, yeah, it's out there. It's proven. We saw it at DroneX, the exhibition, so it's been around for quite a while, and it's very good for its purposes. I think, particularly for the UK, I don't think we're ever going to see parachutes coming down. It's not something that, from a health and safety perspective, in terms of the way we deploy payloads. But I think for certain circumstances, it's excellent. It would be very interesting to see. I mean, a lot of CAPS work's looking at the vibration and the potential quality assurance implications on medicines of the vibration of the drone, but also from shock of landing. So it would be interesting to just see what those would be in that system.
So are you in contact? Are you interested in talking with them? And
yeah, we saw them at DroneX. So yeah, absolutely, it's something of interest in terms of how we could. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Brilliant. Brilliant, Tom. I'm going to have to be really rude because we're
that's all right. No worries.
Abdul, please forgive me. We haven't got time for your question, but I do know there's a catapult at Cranfield that I think fires frozen chickens into things, but I don't think that quite models the drop test. But it's for looking at engines having catastrophic collisions with flocks of geese and that kind of stuff. So, Tom, that was absolutely brilliant. But if I can ask you to go now. Well, not stay for the talk, but we've got Charlotte now. So Charlotte, do you want to grab the screen?
I do. Hi, good afternoon. I'm not sure I can really get one up on your frozen chickens catapult, but great idea. Wonderful presentation. Thank you very much, Tom. I'm just going to share my screen with you all and just run through some slides with you. I can't see you, so please shout, can you see everything on the screen?
Not yet now. We can see you, Charlotte, but that's all.
Okay, this is typical. You should be able to see something coming up. Yeah, got it. Let me put that on full screen. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so this session then, a little bit different. My session is going to be talking about translating rather than the technology. So how we're moving from promising drone capability into something that we can deploy safely, repeatedly, and at scale across the UK with real emergency medical response pathways. So a little bit about DroneMed, who I am, where we're from, just very, very briefly. We don't build drones. We're not a tech company. We're not an academic lab. We kind of sit in the middle. So our job is to work across the regulatory environment, healthcare operations and technology. So we turn advanced drone capability into that deployable emergency medical response service. And we're focused on translating all the fantastic research that you're doing and the technology into a scalable healthcare delivery in real world use cases where we've all worked within. And so our key areas of expertise are within emergency medical response and critical care use cases, operational design, systems integration across various aviation sectors. So we've all worked in other commercial, HEM, states, military sectors of flying those aircraft, but also within the healthcare and digital platforms. The regulatory and safety frameworks for BVLOS, particularly with the air ambulance or the HEMS, helicopter emergency medical services sector, and then the clinical pathway integration within the ambulance services and the first responders, again, with HEMS being one of our forte. But between us, believe it or not, we may not look old enough, but we've got 90 years of experience between these areas. And so the past 3 years, what we've done is that we've been developing an operational tech and software stack. So we're responding to the challenge of delivering AEDs to bystanders using drone tech and advanced geospatial dynamic routing software. So think of an air ambulance, but without a pilot in it. We've also been developing algorithms. My background, mathematician, so I get very excited about things like this to determine drone networks and deployment frameworks specifically for out of hospital cardiac arrest patients in the UK. And that's going to be our phase 1 entry point. So in summary, what we do, we exist because we're bridging the gap between the concept and the impact right the way down the line to the patient. And so we've tackled the problem not just from the technology, but from the human end, if you like, from the regulatory and the user challenges first. So we've taken that clinical challenge and that regulatory ecosystem and then the technology. So why does this matter? Well, community critical emergency medical response is under an awful lot of pressure at the moment. I'm sure you've seen a lot in the news, but minutes matter in cardiac arrest and some trauma. And unfortunately, access and outcomes can vary by location. There's a lot of still health inequalities throughout our nations. And by looking at the technology that exists, unfortunately, at the moment, impact doesn't always follow. So DroneMed really sits between that research, regulation, the healthcare delivery, and the real people on the ground. So by knowing that the drone technology exists, the outcomes depend heavily on where you live, potentially, access and response time. So particularly, I'm thinking rural areas. I live in a relatively rural area in Devon, for example. My nearest AED would take me about 10 minutes to get to by car, which isn't such a great idea when really you want to get to that patient within the first few minutes. So for me, the question isn't whether drones can fly, it's whether they meaningfully change patient outcomes. That's the bit that we're focused on. And so in this virtual room, we've got lots of different disciplines that I've noticed, and none of this is going to work unless we bring all of those together. And so really the purpose of this is that by bringing together the tech, the engineering, those clinical pathways and those human factors, regulation, public trust, bringing all of that together and design it together, that's where we can really bring a concept to have that impact. So the reality, I just wanted to highlight some challenges that we've come across, and this is really where many well-intentioned projects struggle. The friction isn't usually technical, it's ownership, it might be governance, it might be integration with NHS systems and pathways. And also, if I'm thinking of right the way down the end of when a bystander could receive a defibrillator, it's how people behave under stress at the scene. Thinking of the worst possible day of their life where they're next to somebody who's had that cardiac arrest. They are clinically dead, their heart stopped beating, and they need to get some defibrillation to that patient within the first few minutes to increase those chances of survival. And now, interestingly, this is really why we've come together, because having worked in the air ambulance sector and analysed some data, the majority of deployments not in all, but in most air ambulances that focus on medical cases in addition to trauma, cardiac arrest, out of hospital cardiac arrest is a really large proportion of deployments. And, you know, in some cases, we still can't get to the patient or the bystander fast enough. And I think my colleague, Craig, is on this call. He's one of the few people, I think he's the only person I know of in the UK who has worked as a paramedic, as a HEMS air ambulance paramedic, and then switched to the front of the aircraft and flew air ambulances and state aircraft. So, Craig, I just wondered if you're here that you could just maybe just jump in and give some of that anecdotal sort of narrative about how important it is to get to that patient so quickly.
Yeah, hi Charlotte, hi everybody. Basically, from my background, I was an ambulance paramedic for 20 years and 13 years as an air ambulance paramedic. I've obviously seen firsthand and dealt firsthand with out-hospital cardiac arrests. Obviously changing seats to the front after a career change, responsible for getting the crew to these incidents. But the average air ambulance takes 3 to 4 minutes to start up alone. And as we're aware, with cardiac arrest, the first few minutes is the most critical stage of trying to save somebody's life. From the statistics that Charlotte had worked on and available for the United Kingdom, at this current time, there's less than 2% survival rate from out-hospital cardiac arrests. That's including the intervention of an air ambulance. Air ambulance is obviously the most quickest, currently the quickest form of getting a crew to the scene, especially in rural areas. But again, we're still not reaching the targets to achieve to make a successful outcome on trying to save somebody's life. There's average around 35,000 out-hospital cardiac arrests occur in the UK each year. So whilst we've been on this call for almost 45 minutes now, there'll be possibly up to 3 people have had a out-hospital cardiac arrest. So it obviously brings it home the amount of patients that have this a medical emergency at the time. But as I said, basically at this moment in time, the success rate is about 1.7%. And Charlotte has basically designed DroneMed to come on board to make a difference. And hopefully with the use of drones and AEDs, we can hopefully increase the survival rate in due course.
Thanks, Craig. And success rates being survival to hospital. Obviously, there are so many different variables within out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. Oh, my dog's just joined me. Sorry for that. Who can see her in the background. So the reality is then that there are different tensions. They're showing up again and again. And I guess a key question for you all to think about is when a drone stops, or is it when a drone stops being treated as an aircraft and starts being treated as part of a clinical pathway? You know, at what point does that happen? So it's just something interesting to consider. So the translation gap. This is where this is what we've seen in our last couple of years, and I think that really sharing the insight with you is that the biggest risks actually are rarely technical. They tend to be organizational or regulatory or human factors, and these tensions are showing up again and again. And you know, it's, for me, it's just to sort of share some of this, some of these struggles that we've seen, and I think innovation speed, as we all know, it's, you know, it's at such a rate. What would have been good technology maybe 6 months ago has evolved so quickly, and that innovation speed, however fantastic that it is, the public trust is really important in terms of helping to facilitate these sorts of projects, especially when the public are seeing drones in the news day by day. My goodness, it's all too frequent now, of things that are going on in defense and military environments across the Ukraine and Russia. So, you know, they're quite blinkered in some of the things that are going on, but that, I think that public trust is going to be a really important part of moving forward. So from concept to impact, this is really where DroneMed translates some of the wonderful work that you're doing with the drone innovation into community emergency care and critical care. And this is the framework we tend to use. We're not that drone manufacturer, we are tech agnostic, and we're not that research lab, and not just an operator, but we are I see myself really as promoting DroneMed as a systems integrator. So we're very much involved with the healthcare pathways, the aviation and safety regulations, those digital and operational platforms that are used within dispatch systems, and of course, community and bystander experience. So we're the bridge builder across each of these areas, and we want to connect each of these worlds. And I think this is why DRACHMA is so important, that collaboration and that kind of cross-pollination that we get in these sort of environments and meetings, because not one of them are working in isolation. If one of these pillars, of those 5 pillars there, fails, then impact collapses essentially. So our value is helping good ideas survive that contact with the real world and that real world progression. So I'd like to talk to you about Project 3 to Scene, which is something we've been working on. It's about ultra fast AED delivery. So delivering a defibrillator to a bystander with a patient who's had an out of hospital cardiac arrest. It's a deliberately hard use case. This is an area that we've had years of experience in helping patients that have had a cardiac arrest. And it gives us a really clear clock, a strong evidence base. There's no room for novelty here. It's about speed. And that's our hero metric here. It's about reliability. It's about regulatory certainty. And this isn't about experimentation. The challenge we're trying to solve is a clinical problem. The survival rates for out of hospital cardiac arrest are extremely low, and they're highly time dependent. Some of the figures that we've got from Resus Council, British Heart Foundation, and our colleagues in emergency medicine and cardiology, the first 3 minutes is the game changer. That's really where we need to get a defibrillator to those patients and deliver that first shock. And so every minute without defibrillation thereafter, it reduces the survival by about 10% for every minute. So although in those rare circumstances where, let's use an air ambulance as an example, they may get the patient to the hospital within the first 10, 12 minutes potentially, the chances of that patient surviving and then surviving without any neurological complications becomes smaller and smaller for every minute. And so Craig's explained, that the fact that this first 3 minutes is absolutely critical to survival rates. We've seen patients in very unusual circumstances that have been given defibrillation. And one story that I will share with you is a very unusual story where I won't explain too much of the situation, but a patient had an out of hospital cardiac arrest on her holiday in a nice sunny seaside town, and I was there when a crew happened to be in a car, actually a critical care car, driving past, and they were able to get to that patient within 90 seconds. So very unusual circumstance. This doesn't happen a lot. And I saw with my own eyes the lady stand up and was completely didn't know what was going on, and the first thing she said is, "Where's my dog?" So it can happen, and the survival rate can have a massive impact if we deliver that defibrillation within the first few minutes. So out of hospital cardiac arrest, it's time critical, it's a high impact condition. There's strong evidence base for early defibrillation to those patients. It's a very clear emergency pathway, and it's an ideal stress test for system design. So this is what it looks like in terms of the workflow, and it's designed around people and the pathway. So it's built around the call handler, whether that is at the control center for the 999 desk, or the HEMS, the helicopter emergency medical services desk, both of which could potentially deploy the drone to augment the service, not to replace. This is, I really want to stress that, because this supports, it doesn't replace an ambulance response. Delivering that first shock is the critical KPI here, and that's what will increase the the life expectancy of that patient potentially. But the idea is that we can, if you look across from left to right, the safety and the feasibility are assessed in seconds. So we've been developing some of the software for feasibility for a go or no go decision. Now, some of that may be clinical, and the obvious things that the patient could die. If the patient is still alive, there will be factors that feed into that no go decision that will be environmental, airspace, weather, all sorts of different variables that feed into that. And the idea is that the drone gets deployed after that go, no go decision. We don't land, we don't drop an AED, we winch the AED just to be even super fast. So it's winched down so we can get a precise location. We have seen some trials where, unfortunately, winches from too high a height, the wind caught them, and almost like a pendulum effect happened where the AED wasn't given into the hands of the bystander, but just over the fence onto a railway track. Not ideal. So a fast winch system that we're in process of developing right now. And so the idea is that this gives us a real world environment. But really what makes it interesting is because we framed all of this around design decisions, not just the tech spec, because we started with humans here, not the hardware. So we built it around the call handler, the bystander, and not the drone. And so what it's taught us is that this is exactly where the interdisciplinary value really lands. This is where, with engineering and tech development, exceptions matter more than autonomy. It's where, with the clinical ecosystem, trust and usability will drive the outcomes. Within regulatory, we've got healthcare context, and saving somebody's life helps to reshape the risk. And then for those social scientists amongst you, bystander confidence is critical. So the need for public campaigns and public perception, the need for people to understand drones, the benefits, but equally the benefits of just using a defibrillator. Still, the numbers are really low in terms of the confidence rates for people to use a defibrillator, even with somebody that's had an out of hospital cardiac arrest next to them. So the key takeaway from this really is that impact only happens when we've got the technical performance, we've got the clinical usability, and the governance maturity. They all arrive together. And, I'd like to really acknowledge all of the room's expertise here. We've got people across all sorts of different disciplines, and no single discipline can solve this alone. So moving beyond trials, I'd like to really emphasize the responsible innovation. I'm sure all of this is going to resonate with all of you here, because when we talk to regulators and services, what they're really asking for aren't necessarily more demonstrations. It's evidence that reflects operational reality. So this means that trials run in real environments. We want to see real weather, real airspace constraints. Could it be that it's being used potentially on the side of a motorway with police helicopters, air ambulance aircraft in the airspace? That could potentially constrain. We want to see real call handling, pressures, and people at the scene as well. What is the propensity for people to actually use that defibrillator? And think of, and I'm being very, very general here, I'm looking at the average person who may be using this. It could be that a male is more likely to suffer an out of hospital cardiac arrest. This male is more likely to be over the age of 65, which means that it's more likely to be a partner or a close friend or relative with that person. So, they will be having one of the worst days of their life, and having to see a drone come from outer space, as my mother mentioned once, and then seeing a defibrillator being winched down with a very low pickup rate for people to actually be confident enough to use them, to then put the stickers on the patient, to then administer that first shock. There's a lot going on there. And so, that bystander confidence is critical. Moving on to the next slide. This really, I guess, is an invitation to collaborate, because these sort of questions sit right at the intersection of most of the disciplines, I think, that we've got represented here in DRACHMA, because none of these are purely technical or clinical or regulatory on their own, because they can only really work when they're considered together. So from our perspective, progress, it comes from jointly looking at how we rethink how clinical risk and aviation risk are balanced in critical emergency response contexts, and what evidence genuinely unlocks that scalable approval, and how systems perform when real people are under real stress at the scene. But there's also, I think, a responsibility to ensure that deployment doesn't reinforce existing inequalities, because we see an opportunity here to collaborate with people such as yourselves and provide some of those live use cases, operational data, and that regulatory environment or ecosystem where these questions can be explored. And I think, you know, we can explore some of these questions beyond trials and towards real life deployable services. And a closing thought for you all. Well, if there's one message to leave you with, it's that concept only becomes impact when it's designed and delivered together. I can't stress that enough. It's something we've learned along our journey. Emergency response isn't a gadget problem, it's a system problem, and it spans people, clinical pathways, aviation safety risk pathways, governance and trust. But drones can add real value here, but only when they're designed with healthcare rather than a bolt-on. I think that for us, translation, and I come back to the opening part of this presentation, is that translation is where the impact lives, and that's why collaboration across all of your disciplines is really, really so important. So that's all for me. Thank you so much. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Charlotte, that was fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Brilliant. So do we have any questions from the floor? I've got a hand up. A hand up. Do you want to?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Avesta Shorim at Durham University. Thank you, Charlotte and Craig, for the amazing 25 minutes talk. Absolutely remarkable stuff. I've seen a lot of this technology before. I mean, we've seen it in Sweden with Everdrone and Netherlands with TU Delft, who've both employed similar strategies. And in both their contexts, they've really struggled to scale it up, from what I understand, because of bureaucracy, both within the health service and in government, because it has been a primary reason for their failure to scale. And a big reason of this is because there's just a really serious need for demand and attention from both public and politics, really. And my question is, I mean, how do you plan to actually get that sort of support from the public and governments, you know?
So from the government, we just need to provide some data, I think. And so this is why I need some real world examples, not just trials, because some of the trials, and I'll link back to some of the companies that you just mentioned there, I call them a drone in a park. So they'll have a piece of segregated airspace that they're testing something, but it's not a real world environment. So it will be in a small area. Some of the aspects, I'm not saying that with these companies, but some other trials will have aspects of the drone technology that will never get past a regulatory environment, which is why we've tackled it from that regulatory environment and from the end user capacity. So getting data in real life environments, I think, is going to be critical for that. And I think that there's a huge need for a public awareness and public perception campaign. We did work with one, we won an award with the Air Ambulances UK, where we just looked at trialing different perceptions with just using a defibrillator. We didn't even get to the drone part. You know, it's just using defibrillation with the public is a big part. It's about myth busting. It's about people understanding that it's okay to use a defibrillator. You're not going to cause any damage, because from the legal perspective as well, you have to understand that you're not going to inflict any more damage to that patient than they are already in that state of having the out of hospital cardiac arrest. If the patient is alive and they've got it a bit wrong, it doesn't matter that the defibrillator won't administer a shock. And we've obviously trialed and tested all sorts of different defibrillators. within an air ambulance capacity as well, because shockingly, in one air ambulance, we saw a 17% increase in out of hospital cardiac arrest in children in the last 6 years. Not sure why. It may be because some of the routine appointments were kind of knocked off their spot throughout the COVID, the lockdown in the pandemic. And so some of those congenital conditions weren't picked up, but we need to make sure that we've got defibrillators that work on children, on adults, on big hairy chests, on people that don't have big hairy chests. We want to make sure that we can use all of the equipment. So I think, in answer to your question, I think getting the right sort of data in real world environments is one, and then a public perception campaign, and that's the bit that we've got a lot of experience with and would like to work on next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, best of luck for that.
Thank you.
So I've got two hands up and one question. So we're gonna sort of leave it with those three. So Mike Gadd, do you want to just ask your question? Then we'll bring Eric in, and then we'll get EB at the end.
Good afternoon. Yeah, it's not so much a question, more an observation, and it's mainly because I've seen this story so many times over the last decade or so. And the challenge is the big picture issue. Mm-hmm. The fact that the aviation regulator is only concerned with the aviation safety issue. They divorce themselves from the potential good because they have no remit to manage that risk. So however the service or the product that you're dealing with, it sort of falls on deaf ears from them. So bringing that back to Charlotte's comment of real world data, how do you get real world data if you can't carry out real world operations?
Well, if you think about the regulations from a HEMS perspective, so let me use an example of where we have worked for years and have that expertise. Is a very small sliver of exemptions, if you like, within that umbrella, and then we've got another sliver of exemptions again for state aircraft. They're quite different, but there is a route in for saving people's lives. So there is a route that we can take, hence air ambulance aircraft will land from A to unknown B. Sometimes, in fact, Craig, you're probably best placed to answer this in terms of how you can reroute in the middle of going to another patient. Suddenly you're being diverted somewhere else. Sometimes you're taking off and you don't actually know which direction you're going in. In fact, you can't even say to air traffic control, I'm going here, because you don't know until you've lifted. And that's a very unique exemption that you get within the HEMS airspace. And that's really using that expertise and that area of understanding is what's helping us to shape things forward from a regulatory perspective, because it is about saving lives. And that's where you've got the balance between aviation risk and clinical risk. You're saving somebody's life. So there are ways to work towards that. Probably take me too long to talk about all of that now. And oh gosh, we're already over time. Sorry, Paul.
And that's fine. Sorry, Paul. I just find, let's say, being the ex-regulator in the forum, that the HEMS piece is a fully compliant aviation regulatory system, and the challenge with drones is showing that they can meet and integrate into that aviation system. So we haven't solved that problem of getting an ability to integrate and operate. So drawing data from an existing HEMS system is still the challenge. So it's an issue I want to try and help solve, but it's a massive big picture piece, and we're still too fragmented to push our way through the regulatory bureaucracy.
Thanks, Matt. I'd love to pick this conversation up outside this meeting, actually, if that's okay.
Sure.
So maybe I'll drop you a line.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
That's our job at DRACHMA. It sounds like a subject for our actual future DRACHMA meeting. We're a little bit over. If we can be slightly rude and just grab a bit more of your time. Eric's been making some fantastic comments in the chat. I'd love to bring him in because he's one of our newer members. Eric, would you like to?
Yes, good afternoon. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Grateful thanks to your presentation and initiative, Charlotte. 35 years ago, I have been the head of the first aid and pre-emergency hospital care of the International Federation of Red Cross Red Crescent Society for 10 years. So this subject is really something which was on my plate. I will not come back to all what has been done, said. Just 2 points. In terms of public awareness, I did work with the Mr. Bean, if you remember him, and there is a very short video on CPR, and I suggest you, if you don't know it, look at it, and it will give you some tips and tricks for mobilization of lay people. This was his work, and I have to pay a tribute to this fantastic work. For sure, there's the issue about advocacy mobilization of authorities, and I will not come back to what has been said so far, but let's be frank with you, it's a cost-benefit analysis to be provided. When I create the Global Road Safety Partnership with the World Bank, we can promote a lot of humanitarian things, and yes, it's painful, yes, and so on and so forth, but the day we put figures on the table, everything shifts completely. And when I say figures, is how is the cost of a dead, how is the cost of an handicap, not in terms of how it's cost an ambulance, don't care about that, but how it is cost for the society, how it costs for the product of the states in terms of productivity, in terms of social impact, and so on. The day you put this on the table, at that day you will have the government on board. Whatever you can say on humanitarian issues and with the hand on the heart, yes, they will say yes, oh yes, continue, bravo, bravo. But the day you put the figures in front of them, then you can start the dialogue. Sorry to be strict and so frank, but I spent a long time, almost 20 years in that domain, and I can tell you that only figures will move people. And that's the point I wanted to compliment with all you have done and said so far.
Thank you so much, Eric, and couldn't agree more. And in fact, what's interesting is that when we started this journey, when I look at cost figures, let me give you an example of this. They were just off the charts. There was no way we would get any even discussion with this. So we looked at how can we make this ultra fast. Okay, so by going faster, we increase our radius. We hex tiled the whole of the United Kingdom. We picked different areas. Our objective was to expand the radius for the reach, but it meant developing drones that were ultra fast, and that is something that we are just in the proof of concept stage in the next couple of weeks, going out to pull all this together, and we believe we've got something that will make a significant impact, and I mean huge impact to where we were 2 years ago in terms of cost, and that's because of this development of the ultra fast drone, but also to carry the right sort of payloads. But that's where the aerodynamical engineering has come into play, with looking at changing the way that some drones may fly, and it's been a game changer for us. But again, I'd love to pick up this conversation with you, Eric, outside the call, if I may, as well. I'll drop you a line.
With great pleasure.
Fantastic. Tim.
Hello again. A couple of points really, but the first one being on that last comment. That was a really good, concise, unlike myself, but really good, concise put forward. So thank you very much for that. We've got 2,000 pieces of property in the fire and rescue services across the UK. We don't go against demand, so we don't match resources to demand. We match resources to risk, which is a completely different way of looking at it. It takes a lot of explaining to people. So if you've got a nuclear power station, that kind of should get some kind of response, as you can imagine. But also we map our resources according to deprivation. So you will find undoubtedly that the place where you need to put those drones in the first place will be fire stations, because most other agencies have moved out of villages and towns, whereas we've always stayed with that demand-led approach. So the multi-agency aspect of this, because we do not have enough incidents in the fire service to afford this. But in a multi-agency route, between us, we do. And I think that's kind of the way we need to go forward. And from the regulatory point that was made earlier, I have seen a sea change, and JP's just coming in there as well. And it is because of JP in a way, a sea change in the way that the regulators actually look towards the emergency services just over the last few months. And that's mainly because of the work that was done by National Police Chiefs Council and their consultants. So there is light at the end of this tunnel. I can see that myself.
And that's the window that we've been aiming for. That's why it's really put our foot down in the last few months because of that regulatory window. It's interesting what you say about the fire stations there, Tim. What we've done is we've overlaid out of hospital cardiac arrest data with some air ambulance data and then the health inequalities data. And it's interesting because not all areas, but in some fire stations, yeah, they come into play when it comes to be a central point to cover a radius. To get out to the right people. Not that we can predict where cardiac arrests are going to happen. I've just based this on NHS data the last 3 years. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Sorry, I realise we're so over time here, Paul. I mean, do you want questions emailed to me, or do we?
Well, I think we're going to close with JP, and I'm going to make a suggestion for the next meeting because I don't think we can fit all into an hour. So, JP, the floor's yours.
Well, so I feel like I've got an enormous amount of pressure to close this off, but I'm not closing. This is just a comment, really. Tim, you're absolutely right. I mean, to give you some background, Charlotte, we ran for 3 or 4 years. We professionalized the police drone system. So that's working with crewed, uncrewed across through MPAS all the way through to all the individual drone first responder trials. We did all those, and we exactly did what Tim did. So we mapped crime data against where DFR locations would be, and then we ran that through a value tool. So we then started to work out, not in terms of the value about the cost saving, because we know the cost of everything, we just don't know the value of everything. But then how does that then translate into chief constables where they can put bobbies on the beat, etc., so they get more individuals actually on the front line and better outcomes for policing, which is where, of course, we're going with police reform. And the other point as well, you mentioned there about the fact that lots of work has been done about this kind of cross collaboration and things like that. And I know I'm taking up your time, but Charlotte, maybe we can pick this up later because we've done quite a bit of work around that. And I've dropped our website into the chat. You could reach us through that or something.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Charlotte. I think this was an absolutely tremendous meeting. We've got the 2 bookends, haven't we? We've got research, integration, everything in between. We moved from dropping things, emergencies, frozen chickens, hairy chests, and we finished up with Mr. Bean. But I think we've all learned something. So my job now is to save the recording, see if we can get a transcript from it, and then circulate within this group, but also the people that couldn't make it to this particular time slot. I've put a little question in the chat. Do we want to meet again? I'm getting sort of good positive vibes from there. And I think following on our general model, the first Thursday of every month, so that means the 5th of March, I will try and get it a little bit more organized. And so the next thing is, do we have any volunteers for speakers for the next section? I think if we keep this model where we have something more research, something more integration, operational systems, that could work very nicely. So we want more meetings. That's Carl from Norway. Fantastic. That's good. I know, Carl, you may have just presented something, so I may tap you up in the months to come. So I'll leave it there because we are overrunning. And the next bit of learning, I think we need an hour and a half rather than an hour. I was trying to shove too much into the jar there. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to our speakers. A virtual round of applause to Charlotte and Tom. Thank you, everybody, for keeping with the meeting. We are about 15 minutes over time. And let's meet again on the 5th of March. Fantastic.
Well done, Paul. Cheers.
Thanks,
well
Tom.
done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks a lot.